All right, welcome everybody. Namaste, hello, and welcome to What's Your Story. This is your host, Dr. Varun Gandhi. Love and abundance, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Sneha Rao, and I like to give a little bit of context for every episode and the title for every episode. So the episode's title is Hinduphobia in the US. And this episode is really about Hinduphobia. But along with that, we're talking about the cultural appropriation of yoga as well, because they very much go hand in hand. And so in this episode, we will learn from Sneha about what it takes to, about about the yoga, the Hindu appropriation, the yoga appropriation that's going on, the Hindu phobia that's going on in the U.S. and the history of it. So as more people are entering, I want to encourage everyone to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and also if you have any questions throughout this interview, please share it in the comments below, and I will make sure to ask Sneha all of your questions. So who is Sneha? So the way we kind of communicated, we found each other was through Facebook, and then she shared this article with me that she had written. And this article is called Yoga in America, Eating the Other. And it is in this on a blog called Shaktika, right? It's an organization. And I'll allow Sneha to talk more about what the organization does, but along with that, what she means by eating the other. Sneha, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. We really, really appreciate you taking the time out to share your views on this topic. I also want to bring this shirt up. We'll talk about it in a second when we bring up the appropriation, because that's why I really wore this. Um, but before that, can you please share what your story is? What got you interested in speaking out about Hinduphobia and yoga appropriation?
Sure. I'm a Hindu American, first generation. I immigrated here when I was in my early teens. And, what I realized is what I experienced was this low level of Hinduphobia for a long time. People making fun of us for wearing bindis, or just like random comments like, oh, you don't really believe in reincarnation, do you? That sort of thing. And then also generally in the Western US, especially lexicon, there was a recent event where, just like a appointment, where I was at the doctor's office and the nurse, we were talking about our kids, and she like, oh yeah, my kids are total heathens. That's sort of like just low level of homophobia that
Hey,
exists.
Sneha, I think there's some issue with the audio.
Oh, okay, just give me a second.
If you have your headset on, maybe that will work. Yes, there is some background disturbance or some sort of echo going on. Thank you, Neha, for pointing that out. There was something going on Sneha's end, but she's going to really, really quickly fix it. For everyone that's joining us, thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're talking about Hindu phobia and yoga appropriation. So, Sneha had written this article on called Yoga in America, and it's eating the other. Now, eating, she writes this, she gets this concept of eating the other. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, is that better?
Yeah, that sounds a lot better.
Good. Good. I
That's
just
perfect.
switched out of my, I just use a different microphone. It works out better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. It's a lot better. Yeah, go ahead. What's your story? You started, but let's just start from the very beginning.
So I'm a first generation Hindu American. I immigrated to the US when I was in my early teens. And I immigrated. I used to live in Mumbai, and I immigrated here. And what I realized was there was just like this low level of Hinduphobia that existed, but I hadn't interpreted it that way. I just thought it was like a normal thing. And I just experienced a lot of different small, like, I don't know what you call microaggressions. Just the, like, as a kid, people would make fun of bindis, or say just like offhanded comments like, "Oh, you don't really believe in reincarnation, do you?" And just recently, I was at the doctor's office and I was talking to a nurse, and we were talking about our kids, and she was just like, "Oh, my kids are heathens." There's just like this low level of like, well, what do you mean heathens? Like they're misbehaved, right? There was just like this low level of Hindu phobia that has always existed. And then I feel like recently, with after 2014, really, this I would say like this more direct Hindu phobia is much more like has become in your face. And For example, like there are many stories in the community now where the first thing that if they find out you're a Hindu, you will be asked, "Oh, are you casteist? Like, what is your caste?" That sort of thing. Where sometimes we might know the caste, sometimes we don't, but it's like just the assumption that Hindus are casteist is become very, very prevalent. I would say in the larger society. It's becoming very difficult. I experienced it, especially in the last 5 years, very like a lot of difficulty. Being Hindu, practicing Hinduism, even when I've told people, "Hey, that's not really what my parents taught me. They taught me the Gita and the Ramayana, and we went to temple and did bhajans and Carnatic music and that sort of thing." People would still be like, "Yeah, but what is your caste?" So that's really where I started. And then my friends started educating me about what happened to Dharmic people in India during colonization, how there were, millions of people who died during the Islamist colonization, and then the British colonization through like just starvation and extraction of wealth, and just erasure of our educational systems, our ways of being. So it really, after I received that education from a lot of very patient friends, I was like, I decided I wanted to just do something about it. And I found Shaktitva at that time. And this was just after I'd actually given birth to my daughter. And I was really thinking about, I don't want my daughter to do this or experience this. And so I just like come across a Shaktitva article about Raksha Bandhan, and I sent them an email. And since then, like Neha Srivastava, who's one of the co-founders, like called me back, and we started chatting. And I, started contributing in small ways. And then, like just recently, I started writing in for the Shaktitva Journal. And then we collaborated on other projects like the Hindus for Decolonization group on Facebook. And we're growing as a group, but we really try to push like, what is it to mean to decolonize? As a Hindu, what does it mean to be an ally to other people who experienced marginalization and colonization across the globe? So that's that's my that's how I got into this in a
Yeah,
nutshell.
you guys are doing an amazing job, the Shaktitva organization, along with that group, the Facebook group. You guys are doing a great job of sharing authentic material, because a lot of the times it's hard to find that material, find that group that share that common bond with you. So yeah, thank you so much for organizing that and putting that together. Again, for everyone that's tuning in, please like this video, hit the subscribe button. the more you share this video with people, the more you like this video, the more people will get to be part of this conversation and get to enjoy what we have to share here today. So please do that. So can you talk about that article? Can you mention the eating the other and what that means and how that applies to Hinduism?
So, so this whole thing with the Alabama case came up where a Democratic legislator was pushing to uh, reverse a 1993 ban on yoga in public schools. And what he really ended up doing was stripping yoga of all the, Hindu dharmic context, like no Sanskrit names for asanas, no mantra in class. And so it was just like, and I saw many people in the community being like split about it. Well, maybe it's okay because it's going to mean that we're going to have less, we're going to be accepted more into the American culture. And I really started thinking about it, and I was just like, that's really not what's going to happen because, there's so much research about how this other was created, and there's the reason why actually this happens because the conservative Christians were like, oh, they clearly had a lot of resistance to having Hinduism or aspects of Hinduism being taught to their kids. So there was always like this low level of Hinduism or anti-Hinduism that was existent, and then the secular folks basically were like, oh, I still want this in my school, so I'm just going to remove all the Hindu aspects. So the secularization was really a colonization of yoga because they wanted to continue to have it in their public schools or commodify it in yoga studios. So the way that they would do that was through essentially secularizing yoga, which is stripping everything Hindu out of it, right? So they didn't really defend us. They just said, okay, let's just remove the Hindu out of it. And I want to read a quote from Bell Hooks, which is whose scholarship I based this on. So the quote goes, the commodification of otherness has been so successful because it's offered a new delight, more intense, more satisfying than normal ways of doing and feeling. Within the culture, ethnicity becomes spice, seasoning that can liven up the dull dish that is a mainstream white culture. Cultural taboos around sexuality and desire are transgressed and made explicit as the media bombards folks with messages of difference, no longer based on white supremacist assumption that blondes are more fun. The real fun is to be had by bringing to the surface all those nasty, unconscious fantasies and longings about contact with the other, embedded in the secret, not so secret, deep structure of white supremacy. So there's this long history of Hinduphobia in the US, which goes all the way back to the late 18th century when the British were actually bringing artifacts that they were extracting from India and selling to like museums in the US. And every time like a new artifact or set of artifacts would come here, they would have like a slew of publications who would like say stuff like, oh, Hindu gurus are devil worshippers and that sort of thing. And then that's the background, right? And then when Vivekananda brought yoga and to the US in the late 18th century, he was actually dealing with a lot of this background Hinduphobia that existed. There would be protests for him, wherever he went, and he had to kind of work through that. And because he came here specifically to raise funds for his educational institutions in India. And so in India, under intense colonization at that time, and he was really trying to uplift the Indian people. And he, thought that the way to do it is to stop the intense demonization of Hinduism. and also so that he could raise money for his educational institutions back in India. And so he made a compromise. He said, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to bring Vedanta to the West and yoga to, but, you know, so that was just a compromise that he made. He was dealing with that for a long time. And through that process, though, a lot of these white organizations, action organizations, saw his work and even like extracted some of the Vedanta aspects into their own culture. You see that with like the, I think it's like Christian Science folks were really influenced by Vivekananda's work. So you see that like Christianization that happened through Vivekananda. And they were doing that because they knew that if they were purely like Vedantan or purely yogic Vedantan, then they wouldn't be able to spread themselves. And they needed to proselytize this new version of Christianity. And so they would just make it Christian, right? So you see this over and over in history where there's Hinduphobia that exists. Then because of white Protestants who feel like, you know, those dark people are heathens and all this. And then the larger culture is resistant to anything Hindu, like just reactively resistant to Hinduism or any aspect of it. So the people who want to commodify, who want this like transgressive experience, want to sell this transgressive experience, take whatever of Hinduism that they can commodify, and then they like almost like digest it and eat it, you know, into their organizations. And we see that a lot, like a lot of the yoga um, appropriations around sexuality. Like you see a lot of like, you know, sex being sold through yoga. You see like, you could go over Instagram and you see like these really hyper sexualized women in, you know, yogikas. So they're like really like, it's not that we are against sexualization or sexuality rather. It's a we're actualization of something that's really supposed to be about reaching samadhi. Relation. So as a culture, we don't really reject it, but to make yoga about that one thing is the problem. Yeah, I guess I'll stop talking.
No, no, that was great. I think you know how you shared Alabama. You know, one point you mentioned that, and I found this very interesting, that in 1993 Alabama banned the yoga practice in schools, and at that point they actually said that they're banning it because yoga is Hindu. So they didn't appropriate it. They said that okay, this is Hindu, but we can't. But there's phobia against this, so we can't adopt it in our schools, right? And now in 2021, when they lifted the ban, they have stripped out all of that, the Hinduism in yoga, and they have taken it in. So it's very interesting that back in the day they acknowledged that yoga is Hindu, but now they're not willing to do that anymore.
Well, the
Um,
acknowledgement from it comes usually from Christians or other, you know, monotheistic traditions, but it's not about giving us credit. It's about like, oh, those people are heathens. They're, you know,
right.
kafirs. They're gonna, you know, corrupt our culture and society. While yes, it means that yoga remains within the dharmic fold. It's not really coming from a place of like bhaichara or friendship. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would you say that's the case? Like, why do certain monotheistic religions, you know, look down upon us? Like, you know, what's the reason for that?
Um, what I can tell you is that the history of Hinduphobia or Dharmaphobia in general, right, goes back to probably as far as the 18th century uh, German Indologists. And Dr. Adlor and Bakchi have done really great work in the Nay Science to kind of document all this and explain what happened. So they basically wanted to justify colonization. They wanted to justify missionary work in India. They wanted to like encourage people to donate to missionary organizations within Europe and Britain. Like later on from Germany went to Britain, right? So they wanted to justify that sort of thing. They wanted to justify civilizing missions, right? They wanted to say, oh, Europeans are not just there to extract wealth. We're also there to civilize the, backwards, people. So that was, I think, the new twist in the whole thing, that they were selling it to their own people as charity work. And those narratives, you could still see them, all the way to today in the way that, our cultures are defined. So yeah, that's really where all that comes from. And with monotheism, so even if you look at the history of how race became a thing, race became a thing because white Protestant Christians, defined race, or brought up race as part of like, oh, we are the new chosen people. White Europeans are the new chosen people. We are so amazing, and everybody else is not, clearly because they're not Christian. So even race as a category was really originated in demonizing of indigenous people who happened to be Black and brown at that time, because they had already, removed all the indigenous cultures within Europe by the 18th century. So that's really how race came about. And then they went about developing all these quote sciences where they measured people's like phenotypes and all this other things and tried to define what race was. So that's really where everything comes from. And unfortunately, our history becomes fragmented. But what's happening with racism in the West is actually very related to, the narratives that are forced against India, or even in, like, for example, Rwanda, right? That conflict was about racialization of two groups and setting one group up, or selling this idea that one group is better than the other. So a huge part of coloniality was racialization of indigenous people. And they had all these like categories, how they like rated who was closest to being white. So you see these narratives about Vedanta and Tantra, and that Vedanta is like closer to like the pure Christian one, singular God, when Vedanta's never rejected bhakti, never rejected Krishna or Shiva. There's like all these like strains of Vedanta that were all about worshiping different gods, Ganesha, So yeah, so they had all these like the ideas that they kind of pushed on us by our education system and then superimposing their own educational system on top of us. Yeah.
Talking about educational system, one of the ways that the masses are educated is through movies as well. And, so let's talk about what's, Hinduphobia in the movies, because I think that's a huge topic.
Yeah. Uh, I can tell you. So there's like different strains of it. You see Hinduphobia in like the Western movies, like the 1983 movie comes to mind, where the Kali worship is shown as something that's about like extracting someone's heart and eating it and stuff. And you can see almost like direct line going back to uh, early 19th century coloniality propaganda in American newspapers to that. So there's that. But nowadays, you don't see so much of that. What you see is like Hindus being depicted as castes. I think there was a recent movie on Netflix called I don't know if you watched it, but it basically like made it look like the Hindus were just so casteist. Like it was everybody, like that was the only experience. And it was clear that it was for a Western gaze, because everybody that I knew in India, they were like, that doesn't look right. That doesn't seem right. So that's the new. And then you also have like in India, Bollywood type things where I forget what it was. It was like a Shah Rukh Khan production, and it was about like a horror kind of feel to it, where they were destroying like this indigenous tribal area's land, and there was a Hindu who was like the bad guy in it. And right after he kills all the tribals, he goes and distributes pieces of coconut. Like they're just dead bodies on the ground, and he's like distributing prasad, like, holy food. And so that's what's our culture is being depicted as. So there's a lot of that normalization of trying to make, or like, it's not that Hindus can't be bad people, right? It's that you're projecting it as it's inherent to Hinduism, that Hindus have to be bad because Hinduism is bad. That's really the underlying issue. It's not that Hindus can't, it's that that's the only way we're allowed to be depicted in the media. So that's really it. Because yeah, there's discrimination in our culture. There's definitely that, but there's also people who are gurus who worked against the discrimination, gurus who point to the Gita and say, look, this is what Krishna said, and Krishna said that this is not okay, that we each have dharma to not only our own people, but between groups of people, there's dharma there, between Brahmins and Kshatriyas and there's dharma that needs to be upheld. And oppression is definitely like something that is adharmic. It's very clear, clearly laid out in our texts by our gurus over and over again through the centuries. So that's really the issue, that what media depicts is that if you are Hindu, you have to be a bad person. You have oppressive.
Yeah, and I've also seen that in certain movies where the caste would be a thing. The Hindu person would be like, "Oh, this guy's a different caste. He's a lower caste. I'm not gonna do business with this person or share food with this person," right? Or there's that the Seth, the businessman who is greedy, who's always looking for increasing their bank balance as opposed to helping people. I've seen that in a lot of movies as well. So yeah, it's definitely a very negative portrayal in many movies. And then there was a recent Saif Ali Khan movie called Tandav, where they showed certain. What was that incident about?
I actually never watched it because people were just like, don't watch it, to be completely honest. But I know Saif Ali Khan is known to be pushing like Hinduphobic agendas. So yeah, I've seen his other work and always had like this tone of Hindus are bad, that sort of tone. So yeah.
And even Amir Khan does that. I feel like a lot of his movies have that propaganda as well in it, embedded in there. Um, So, okay, movies is one thing, and then we kind of talked about a little bit about the modernization of Hinduism versus adapting to the older to the times. So, what have you seen of Hinduism in current times?
Um, I'm not sure how to answer that. I guess so. There's a lot of pressure on the community to quote unquote modernize, and that is a colonial concept that Hinduism is to modernize in order to survive or exist or form or whatever, because it ignores our history. It ignores the fact that um, there are aspects that are bad within the community, but there's no examination of where those aspects really come from. Are they coming from trauma, experiencing colonization for almost 1,000 years? What do our gurus say? There's nothing that. And what I see in the community is that some people are starting to kind of buy into it, and then there's some people who are resisting it. And there's many people who are actually working to teach our kids about Hinduism, about Dharma, in a way that they understand, and can bring to their lives every day. So that's really wonderful. But I also see there's like a section of the Hindu community that is, their kids are experiencing bullying, and sometimes that means that they actually leave Hinduism. They're not able to pass their traditions on to their kids because their kids reject it because of what they're seeing in the culture, and they don't want to experience. They want to be part of the mainstream culture and not be constantly told that what they're practicing is horrible. There was a recent article, I forget, I think it's like Religion News, where there was a kid who um, learned about the typical caste pyramid in school, and his family didn't ever they had never taught him about it. It just wasn't part of their practice. And this is a Hindu American person, and he home and asked his mom about it, and well, we're this caste, and so that was the first time like he was being introduced to it as a concept, and so we're almost like forced into it, so that's what I see in the community.
That's the horrible introduction to Hinduism for the kid.
Yeah.
Wow. That's yeah. I wouldn't do that. Again, everyone that's watching, please like this video, hit the subscribe button so that more people can join in on this conversation. And also, if you guys have any questions, please comment below, and let's get your questions answered as well. Sneha, part of the other, we talked about Hinduphobia. Now we want to talk about appropriation. You had this kind of beautiful understanding of what appropriation is. Can you talk about that?
So I think we should define cultural appropriation, because appropriation is a word used like neutrally, like I, went and appropriated this idea, something like that. In science, they use that word like in a scientific way, right? And just means I just learned somebody else and I'm using it. But cultural appropriation ever occur on even terms. It's always the dominant culture taking from the marginalized culture. And the other part of that, which I believe Bell Hooks lays out beautifully, is that they kind of hang this in for the marginalized culture. The marginalization is always like a historic thing, right? But they hang this out. Okay, if you let me appropriate this from you, then you will be accepted into the larger community. So they like, extract, eat the other marginalized culture, and they dangle this idea of acceptance in front of us. Um, so that's happens, and that's why actually like you see a lot of conversations within the culture, within like the community, where they're like, well, we are getting this sort of thing. But what the dominant culture is really doing, because first we're othered, so we're demonized, and then there's like a section of the dominant, like, I don't, I want to reject this dogma. I want to reject, I want to be like a rebel, like you see that with the free love culture, like the new age stuff, right? They have this like rebel image of themselves. So I want to be like transgressive. I'm bored, whatever. So then they go and take aspects of the other's culture without actually actually like bringing justice to the marginalized culture. They just take, and then they say, oh, if you let us take, then it means that you have acceptance. The truth is that that's not really the case. Are usually eliminated from, even, I mean, our onto epistemological frameworks, our ways of being are essentially discarded. Yoga, for example, there's no way that it's taught in the way that Dharma have taught it for thousands of through the Guru Shishya tradition, there's like a lot of rejection of the gurus. They demonize gurus, right? There's like a recent documentary making fun of this guy who, faked being a guru, and all these like white people fell for it. And, it was never like told that, yeah, but in the culture, people don't really recognize gurus, good gurus. Where in Dharmic culture, that's part of our upbringing to be able to recognize gurus. So they have removed the way we transmit our knowledge. There's like a open redefinition of yoga, where you see like bhakti yoga, and you also see actually now you see like people who are indigenous by identity, or will there's a woman called Akosia Red Elk. She runs a race and yoga journal. And she basically goes around and sells something called powwow yoga. And it's based on this buddy yoga, which is basically, it's like a dance routine. So she's appropriating not just from Hindu culture, but also from indigenous Turtle Island indigenous cultures, because powwow and yoga are like two completely separate things. So to make that in that way, and the third part is that she also like sells it. She sells it as a class, something that was, done within the context of elders teaching their kids, passing on tradition in their kids, both yoga and, powwows. That's now commodified and sold as something that is to be consumed by the larger culture, as something to experience, like a transgressive experience for the larger culture. So that's really what cultural appropriation is. Yeah.
And then partly you kind of mentioned that, but that also destroys the Guru Shishya tradition, right? Because they're no longer passing it on from Guru to Shishya, but it's more of you're paying for it now.
Yeah. So there's all these movements called like post lineage yoga, and where they basically destroy the Guru Shishya tradition. So, and by the way, it's not just us Dharmic people who experience this. Even within other indigenous cultures, you are required to be initiated into a certain practice. Like that's a very common cultural thing. That goes. The initiation might look different, but there is this concept of initiation, and usually an elder will initiate, give you an evaluation, and see like, is that practice really right for you? And they basically, because if you are going to set it up that way, you can't commodify it, right? You can't say, if the elder goes, no, I don't think you're right for this, then you cannot commodify it, because commodifying is all about exchanging money. And as long as there's an exchange of money, you can buy whatever you want. So that is why they basically want to destroy the Guru Shishya tradition, or traditions that any indigenous tradition where the passing of the knowledge is based on elders, and elders lovingly bringing in younger folks into the tradition in a protective sphere. That does not work with commodification. Yeah.
Right, and I guess what happened is also, unfortunately, I remember in India, yoga was not accepted for a while, and then it came to America. And after it became a big movement in America, now people in India are accepting it, and they're accepting this whitewashed version of yoga, not what yoga truly is, right?
Yeah, and you see that within our community too. Like, it's soft power. Neha just asked me a question, and people often mistake it for soft power. It's really not. It's erasure. It's being eaten. Because, so I'll give you an example. So India, under the Modi International Yoga Day, and they went to the UN and did all the things, right? and they said, oh, it's going to be inclusive, you're going to, learn yoga around the world. It was like this initiative to extend like that whole, the whole like culture around everybody's my sister and my brother to the world, as soft power. But you see the demonization of that in actual, like the yoga world. You see like yoga people. I saw like Susanna Barkataki recently, like, oh, it's about Hindu nationalism. So it's not really so they're still going to sell products for International Yoga Day, but they don't really want any of that to actually be shared with the indigenous people. So they basically say, oh, it's Hindu nationalism. It's not about any of that, but they're perfectly fine selling yoga classes for International Day or products. So that's so there's really no soft power to be gained from that sort of, from that sort of thing. So allowing, or even some people even participate in the mission. So allowing that sort of thing is really not, is really not going to help the community, because they will find a way to use the demonization, the Hinduphobia, the Dharmaphobia against us in the long run to eliminate our actual like, ways of being. Like that's really the goal. As long, but if we, choose to kind of integrate into the commodity culture, because you see that a lot. Like a lot of South Asians are now part of Yoga Alliance. So if we kind of allow our traditions to be destroyed, like the Guru Shishi tradition destroyed, then because of the, specific based anti-racism movement, where the diversity is only about, diversity of skin color or the way you look, and not actual diversity of ways of being, then you could, actually become like you could actually make a lot of money now as a brown person, but not as a Hindu person, right?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, let's say, festivals, spiritual festivals or yoga festivals that have mainly 95, 99% white teachers showing yoga, right? There's no people of color in some of these festivals in their lineup. So it's very interesting how, they don't, I guess, in a way, give credit or pay homage to the people who brought yoga to America. Um, I wanted to bring up a point about what was it? I had it at the tip of my mind. Um, no, I completely forgot. I lost my train of thought there. Kundan actually mentions it's so disturbing to see yoga allow create the ridiculous post lineage yoga and really push for it. It's another way of saying they've improved and modernized yoga from the backwards primitive savages, kind of like what we were talking about. There. What would you say about how do you combat that? I know you're doing a great job, and the Shaktitva organization is doing a great job of kind of speaking out about it whenever they see something they point it out. I could see how certain yoga teachers who are just even if they're brown, they're just picking up yoga. They're coming out of the yoga teacher training, and now they want to gain acceptance. They want to be have clients. They want to be sharing their knowledge with people, and so they don't. Maybe they have this a hard time. They see the appropriation, but they don't want to speak out against it because they don't want to be vilified in the community. So, kind of, what would you say to help them?
The only thing I can say is I, sympathize with people who are in the industry, especially like South Asians who are in the industry, because and want to say something but cannot, because the structure is so against them. I know of indigenous yoga teachers who were platformed, but when they resisted the main message, were quickly deplatformed by the people in power to like just be replaced by another uh, South Asian looking person, just token people. So I completely sympathize with that. I think the only thing that I would say is that, when you do get into positions of power, elevate like the voices that are actually fighting for indigeneity, resist it at whatever level you can. I completely understand like some people need to be able to put food on their table. That's a real thing. So, but if you, when and if you can, elevate indigenous voices, elevate like, or speak out against it, create organizations that protect indigenous cultures, um, or go gives alternates to people who come up behind you. That's all I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a hard place to be in when someone, it's they're doing it for their livelihood and they want to, put food on their table, but they also want to stand up for the truth. I completely understand. I think that's a great advice to give someone. Do the best you can in the situation you're in, right? Um, I recently learned we are already having a situation where traditional Chinese medicine practitioners are arrested for practicing their authentic culture, because the only way to legally practice and get certified. Wow, yeah, this that could happen to yoga. Very, very great point, Kundan. I'm gonna put that up here real quickly.
That could
Um,
happen to yoga and Ayurveda. That could happen. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can already see it starting to happen in Ayurveda. That uh, yeah, I think it's only time that it's going to happen further. Um, I think those are all the questions that I had on my end, and I think we, went into great detail and covered a lot of different topics today. Sneha, is there anything else that you'd like to share about our topic today that we may have missed?
I did just want to mention, there's a lot of, so when I say Hindu, right? I think that uh, there's a lot of issue, like a lot of other dharmic traditions take issue, or people, especially if they're in the West. And I feel like that comes from this division that gets sown between different dharmic traditions, Jains and Hindus, for example, or Hindus and Sikhs, for example. I haven't seen it to Jains and Hindus, but definitely I see it between Hindus and Sikhs, Sikhi people now, which is really sad. Because in India, if you look at our history, uh, the third son of every Hindu family would go and join the Sikh tradition and join their army to protect Hindus. Like that was our culture back in the day, and that was like destroyed because of colonization. So I want to bring that up, and then I also am starting to see this between Jains and Hindus now, um, that the culture was of this very fluid tradition where Hindu kings and Jain kings and rulers and leaders all like supported each other. So if you go to Rajasthan, there are like beautiful Jain temples, and they were often funded by a Hindu king. And those centers, informed other Hindu traditions. Like Jain people created traditions, and they informed other Hindu traditions. So there was a lot of like idea mixing that wasn't cultural appropriation, because it wasn't like the dominant culture taking from the marginalized culture, but this beautiful culture where there was like all these rivers that flow and they diverge and they meet back down the line. So so we should really resist that sort of um, message, that sort of division. We should really look at what historically how our culture was. And Hindu, I always feel like we were all like, we had a lot of unity between Sanatana Dharma people. So I just want to make sure that that's understood.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Neha kind of mentioned, had a question on elaborating about how yoga was not accepted in India. I think there are certain youth, current youth, that looked at yoga as if looked down upon yoga until the influencers picked it up, until it came back. This whitewashed version came back from America to India, and I had done a panel discussion on cultural appropriation of yoga, and Luvina Rangel was part of that, and she had mentioned this point as well, that it felt like, her being in India, currently in South India, and her being there, she has seen this where more and more youth are now getting on board with yoga and actually participating and practicing yoga, just because these influencers, just because Western influencers have picked it up and made it a thing over here, and now they're picking it up over there. So that's kind of what I meant there. And Sneha, would you agree with that, or what would you say?
Yeah, there's actually a long history of actually British or late. It started with the Dutch in the late 16th century, where we had like these yogis who would go and actually fight against the colonizers, to the point where they destroyed, like, or they really affected the ability for the East India Company to make money in Bengal. So that's when the British really started putting a lot of coloniality, a lot of colonial propaganda against the yogis as people who were, degenerate. And they were people who, maybe weren't tied to a particular place and time. Like that was how they practiced. They were around the country. So they were forced to stop doing that. And their ways of being were basically, they were forced to like live in certain places, and they essentially became very poor. And because of the demonization, a lot of Hindus stopped supporting them as well. So they got a reputation, and a lot of it was also like built up, from my understanding, though I'm researching this aspect of it, like who really started this idea that yogis were poor people who, stole for whatever. There was all these like colonial narrative, like, oh, they're dirty, they're this, that. So where did that really come from? I think the Western academia would tell you that it came from Hindus, or quote unquote Orthodox Hindus. But I also feel like just the history of the fact that the Dutch published so much negative stuff about yogis and yoga as a whole. So that's where it come from. And then I feel like, okay, Neha said, you're talking about modern music and part of the logic. Yeah, so I agree with what Neha is saying here. Yeah, so they were very, so yeah, modern youth are, I guess, especially go through like Western traditional education. A lot of them seem to be very colonized, and buy into a lot of these colonial narratives. But I think your point was that they're like adopting yoga now because it's popular in the West. And I just want to explain why perhaps maybe yoga, as especially yoga asana, and yogis weren't very popular people. But yeah, like yoga, for example, was always practiced through bhakti, always practiced through, going to temple. Like going to temple is yoga. You're practicing union with the divine. Jnana yoga was always practiced. Vedanta taken in a lot of yogic concepts. So yoga darshana was never, rejected. It just didn't look like what it does in the West, because the West focuses so much on the asana aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, two quick questions. So one is, we mentioned Shaktitva organization as a great resource. Do you have any other recommendations for resources that people who are interested in this conversation, they can go and check it out?
I recommend reading through George Feuerstein's History of Yoga book. It's amazing. It was really just educational, puts a lot of resources in. He represents the voice of Hindu gurus and Buddhist gurus and Jain gurus as well. So I feel like that was really, an eye-opening book for me. So if people are interested in that, I would definitely read it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And if people are looking to join in on the conversation and they want to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you at?
They can always find me and DM me all over Facebook, or through the Shaktatva organization. If they sent an email there, then somebody would forward it to me.
Okay, and the website is shaktitwa.org.
And I can send you the link after this. And
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'll post that in the comment in the description. Uh, well, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Sneha, so much for joining in. Everyone that's watching, please like this video, share it with a friend, share it with someone who would enjoy this conversation, because the more people that are involved, the more we could spread and share, and more people can, stop the spread of appropriation of yoga. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sneha, for your enlightening conversation and for your insight into yoga appropriation and Hindu phobia in the U.S. Thank you, everyone that joined in. Neha, for all of your comments. Kundan, for all of your comments and questions, and Neha for your questions as well. And also, there was a Z who put in a couple comments. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. Love and abundance, everybody. I hope you all have a fantastic day, fantastic weekend. Namaste.